it now gives me great pleasure to turn to Audreyanna Thomas, and who really touches on issues related to social justice and governance that the Vice Chancellor had referred to. But it's not me to tell her what to say. I want to call on her to take the baton from Neville.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Green. And I'd like to say that I really appreciate being a part of this distinguished panel on this very important discussion at a very, it's a timely discussion also. As I listened to Dr. Trotz, I thought of how well we are able to articulate what our challenges and opportunities are. I would like to discuss some of the mechanisms. I think in the region in Guyana, an area that we need to improve on is in terms of developing the mechanisms by which we can actually implement in the most effective ways our what we've articulated in terms of our development challenges. I would like to start off by saying, yes, Guyana can be an oil producing country as well as be a leader in climate change. But I'd like to look at 3 areas: reforms, legislative reforms, administrative reforms, institutional reforms, social justice as it relates to access, equity, diversity, participation, and human rights. And also, I'd like to look at sustainable development, but particularly sustainable business. And even as Dr. Trotz mentioned and Dr. Green, you picked up on it, the opportunity for Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago to sort of partner as it relates to in the energy sector and as it relates to assisting the region to find solutions. But I think in the Guyana context and perhaps the regional context too, we need to look at how we're organized. Part of our challenge in the Guyana and the region is how we're organized. And the other aspect is, even as we talk about that possible partnership, we need to ask ourselves whether all 3 countries have the requisite discipline to achieve the goals and the objectives. And I'd also like to talk about that discipline and how we're organized. In the Guyana context, there is need for significant, if Guyana is going to be a leader in climate change, as well as be an oil and gas economy society, there is need for a level of discipline in order to achieve that Guyana needs to work towards, as well as even in the regional context. We also need to review how we're organized. And I'll give you an example. In 2013, Mexico, there was what is called the Pact of Mexico, Pacto de Mexico, or Mexico, I think it was. And that pact was, after 80 years of a deadlock at the level of governance in relation to the oil and gas sector, energy sector in Mexico, there was an agreement by the governing bodies to come together and develop a way forward that opened up enormous opportunities for the Mexican oil and gas economy or oil and gas sector industry. Mexico is the top oil and gas producing country in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's the 10th in the world. Guyana is going to be among the 25 largest oil producing countries in the world. Hence, Guyana cannot escape not accelerating institutional, administrative, and legislative reforms. I'd also like to, with regards to, I'd like to also give some examples. If we look at what is happening as it relates to the environment, human rights, and investment in Guyana, we're already beginning to see tensions and conflicts between international investment law and environmental law, human rights law. I'll give you an example. If we look at the mangrove issue, there's a bigger issue that can be addressed, which is really about tensions between environmental laws and investment laws or investment norms. So in this discussion, we have to look at how do we harmonize, how do we identify what are the conflicts between the investment norms and the environmental and human rights norms. So that's one area that is, and that is going to reduce significantly some of the tensions that we're beginning to see, particularly between civil society and administrators. The other aspect is in terms of achieving the goals and objectives of an oil and gas economy at the level at which Guyana is going to be operating as one of the 25 largest oil producers, as well as a leader in climate change, there's need for significant institutional and administrative reforms and discipline. So those are areas that we need to look at as a country. And I'd like to also look at social justice. And social justice in terms of the oil and gas industry, except we look at the institutional, administrative, and legislative reforms, there are certain groups like women, youth, indigenous peoples, they can be left out of this rapid development. So there is need for us to address issues as it relates to social justice. And as it relates to participation, for example, I think there's an opportunity. There are also mechanisms in Guyana. For example, there's the multi-stakeholder, the Guyana Extractive Industry and Transparency Initiative multi-stakeholder group. I think that groups like those can be given greater involvement and participation in the oil and gas sector. So participation is key. And the other aspect is in terms of human rights. Human rights, the United Nations have the business and human rights. I haven't heard anything much on business and human rights in Guyana. I think that organization can really, and that the concept of business and human rights can really contribute towards strengthening the mechanism for achieving the kinds of issues that we're articulating.
Thank you.
I'd also like to look at two other areas. In terms of sustainable business, the United States, in 2019, about 200 of the largest companies in the United States came together in what is called the Business Roundtable. And they have decided that they were going to contribute towards or do business in more sustainable ways. I think those are examples that Guyana can look at as we look at developing a sustainable or a human rights compliant investment environment, sustainable business environment. There is also the United Nations Global Compact. Those are already established principles, guidelines, organizations that we can build on. I'd also like to mention the point on one of the things I think we sometimes miss is the complexity of societies. And this discussion is very, very important. This week, as we discuss the possibilities, is very important. What I particularly like about the workshop is at the end in terms of developing that investment strategy. And some of the points that I'd like to recommend that could perhaps influence considerations in developing that strategy could be reforms. I'd like to close on this note: reforms, social justice issues, and sustainable business. Last point I'd like to make, for example, in terms of investment agreements, even at the level of investment agreements, issues such as environment can be included in investment agreements. Countries like Canada, for example, they have included now aspects of the environment in investment agreements. And so these are examples that Guyana can learn from. The other point I'd like to make is that governments may not necessarily want to include civil society and academia in the development or the drafting of investment agreements, but there can be an agreement on what are the areas and the aspects which should be included in international investment agreements. For example, areas of human rights and the environment. So another last point that I'd like to make is that Guyana has an excellent opportunity to be one of the leaders in, as a model as an oil and gas economy, society, as well as a leader in climate change and climate resilience.